The gunshot echoed across the dusty plain, sending a flock of startled birds into the azure Montana sky, as Lillian Astor pressed her face against the stagecoach floor, her heart pounding like a war drum against her ribs. It was supposed to be a simple journey from Helena to Sweetwater Creek, a chance to start anew after her father's passing, but fate had other plans for the 23-year-old schoolteacher on this sweltering July afternoon in 1876. "Nobody move, and nobody gets hurt," a gruff voice commanded from outside the coach. Lillian could feel the vehicle rock as the driver was forced down at gunpoint. She clutched her reticule tightly, feeling the outline of her father's pocket watch the only keepsake she had left of him. Beside her, an elderly couple huddled together, the woman softly whimpering into her husband's shoulder. The stagecoach door flew open, revealing a masked man with cold eyes visible through narrow slits in his bandana. "Valuables. Now." He thrust a burlap sack into the coach. "Watches, money, jewelry, all of it." Trembling, Lillian placed her reticule in the sack, but quickly slipped the watch into the folds of her dress. The old couple surrendered their possessions as well, the man's hands shaking as he removed his wedding band. "Get out," the bandit ordered, gesturing with his pistol. "Line up outside." The hot Montana sun beat down mercilessly as Lillian and her fellow passengers stood beside the stagecoach, watching helplessly as the bandits, 4 of them in total, ransacked their luggage. Their leader, a tall man with a distinctive scar visible beneath his mask, approached the driver. "Where's the strongbox?" "Ain't carrying one today," the driver replied, his voice steady despite the gun aimed at his chest. The leader's eyes narrowed. "Liar." He nodded to one of his men who dragged a heavy box from beneath the driver's seat. With a triumphant laugh, the leader turned back to the passengers. "Mount up, boys. We got what we came for." Lillian watched in horror as the bandits prepared to leave. "What about us?" she called out, immediately regretting drawing attention to herself. The scarred leader approached her slowly, looking her up and down. "Pretty thing like you. Maybe we should take you along for company." "Leave her be," the elderly man protested, stepping forward only to be shoved roughly back. The bandit leader laughed, then seemed to reconsider. "Nah, too much trouble." He turned to his men. "Unhitch the horses." "What? No." The driver lunged forward but stopped short when a pistol was aimed at his head. "Can't have you following us now, can we?" The leader grinned beneath his mask as his men released the team of horses, slapping them to send them galloping away across the plain. "You folks enjoy your walk back to Helena. It's only about 20 miles that way." He pointed vaguely westward. The elderly woman let out a sob. "We'll die out here." "Not my problem, madam." The leader tipped his hat mockingly before mounting his horse. "Let's ride, boys." In a cloud of dust, the bandits disappeared over a ridge, leaving Lillian and the others stranded in the vast, unforgiving landscape. "We need to start walking," the driver said grimly, helping the elderly man support his wife. "If we're lucky, we might reach the Crowley Ranch by nightfall." But as they gathered what meager possessions the bandits had left behind, a terrible realization dawned on Lillian. The driver and the elderly couple were already several paces ahead when she called out, "Wait, my medicine!" The driver turned, his weathered face questioning. "My medicine for my asthma, it was in my valise. They took it." Panic rose in Lillian's chest. She'd suffered from breathing spells since childhood, and the special tonic her doctor had prescribed was her lifeline during an attack. The driver's expression darkened. "Miss, we can't go after them. It's suicide." "But I will find help at the ranch," he insisted, though his tone lacked conviction. "Can you walk?" Lillian nodded, though her throat already felt tight with fear. She gathered her skirts and followed the others, each step taking her further from her stolen medicine, and deeper into uncertainty. They had traveled less than a mile when the elderly woman collapsed, unable to continue in the blistering heat. Her husband and the driver fashioned a makeshift shelter using the man's coat, but it was clear they couldn't all continue together. "I'll go for help," the driver announced. "You stay here with the ladies," he told the elderly man. "I'll be back with horses as soon as I can." Lillian watched the driver disappear into the distance, a knot of dread forming in her stomach. Hours passed. The sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the plain. The elderly woman slept fitfully while her husband fanned her with his hat. Lillian paced anxiously, her chest growing tighter with each passing moment. "Miss Astor," the elderly man called softly, "please conserve your strength." Lillian nodded and sank to the ground, but her mind raced with terrible possibilities. What if the driver couldn't find help? What if he'd been attacked by wild animals or encountered the bandits again? As the sky turned crimson, she made a difficult decision. "Mr. Pearson," she addressed the elderly man, "I'm going to continue on. The driver mentioned Crowley Ranch. Perhaps I can reach it and bring back help sooner." "But Miss Astor, it's nearly dark." "A young woman alone, I have no choice," Lillian interrupted, her voice firmer than she felt. "Mrs. Pearson needs help, and I fear I may have an attack soon without my medicine." Reluctantly, Mr. Pearson agreed, giving her directions as best he could remember from previous journeys. With a prayer on her lips, Lillian set out alone into the gathering dusk. The vast Montana landscape, so beautiful by day, transformed into something ominous as darkness fell. Strange sounds emerged from the shadows, making Lillian's skin prickle with fear. She walked steadily, focusing on placing one foot before the other, refusing to acknowledge the growing tightness in her chest. After what seemed like hours, she spotted a faint light in the distance. Hope surged through her, giving her renewed energy. But as she quickened her pace, the unmistakable sound of hoofbeats reached her ears. Lillian froze, terror washing over her. Had the bandits returned? She ducked behind a large boulder, pressing herself against the cool stone as the rider approached. Through the darkness, she could make out the silhouette of a lone man on horseback, moving at a steady pace. Not a bandit riding hard, she reasoned, but still, she couldn't take chances. The rider drew nearer, and to Lillian's surprise, he reined his horse to a stop not 20 feet from her hiding place. "Hello," a deep voice called out. "Is someone there?" Lillian remained silent, her hand pressed against her mouth. "I know someone's there," the voice continued. "I saw movement. I'm not looking for trouble. The name's Garrett James. I'm from the Double J Ranch near Sweetwater Creek." Sweetwater Creek, her destination. Lillian's mind raced. Was this divine providence or a clever trap? "If you're from the stagecoach that was robbed earlier today," the man called, "I'm looking for survivors." The driver made it to Crowley Ranch and said there were others left behind. Relief flooded through Lillian, but caution still held her back. "I've got water and supplies," the man added, dismounting slowly. "And I'm armed, but not against you, against those who might do you harm." The sincerity in his voice finally convinced her. Lillian stepped out from behind the boulder, her legs nearly giving way beneath her. I was on the stagecoach," she managed to say before a coughing fit overtook her. The man Garrett was at her side in an instant, supporting her with a strong arm around her waist. "Easy now, miss. Here, drink this." He offered her a canteen, which she accepted gratefully, the cool water soothing her parched throat. In the moonlight, Lillian could make out his features, a strong jawline shadowed with stubble, eyes that seemed to hold genuine concern, and a mouth that curved into a reassuring smile. He wore typical ranch attire: denim pants, a cotton shirt, and a leather vest with a revolver holstered at his hip. "Thank you," Lillian whispered once she'd caught her breath. "There are others, an elderly couple. They're about a mile back. The woman is unwell," Garrett nodded. "A search party is already headed their way. The driver told us where he left them." He studied her face. "Are you hurt, miss?" "Astor, Lillian Astor, and no, not hurt, but—" She hesitated, embarrassed by her weakness. "I have a breathing condition. My medicine was in my luggage, which the bandits took." Understanding dawned in Garrett's eyes. "We need to get you to a doctor." He glanced at his horse. "Think you can ride with me? Crowley Ranch is still a few miles away." Lillian nodded, allowing him to help her onto his horse before he swung up behind her. His arms encircled her as he took the reins, and despite her predicament, she found herself acutely aware of his proximity, of the solid warmth of his chest against her back. "Hold tight, Miss Astor," Garrett said, his breath warm against her ear. "We'll have you safe in no time." As they rode through the moonlit prairie, Lillian fought to keep her breathing steady, but the exertion of her walk and the stress of the day were taking their toll. Her chest constricted painfully, each breath becoming more labored than the last. "Mr. James," she gasped, clutching at the saddle horn. "I can't, Lillian." Alarm colored his voice as he felt her body go rigid against him. "Lillian, stay with me." Through the haze of her attack, Lillian was dimly aware of Garrett spurring the horse to a gallop, of his arm tightening protectively around her waist, of his voice in her ear, urging her to hold on just a little longer. The world narrowed to the sound of thundering hooves and the desperate struggle for each breath. Then darkness claimed her. Lillian awoke to the soft crackle of a fire and the smell of coffee. For a moment, she lay still, disoriented, trying to piece together her memories. The Stagecoach robbery. Being left behind. The long walk. Garrett. She opened her eyes to find herself in a small but comfortable bedroom. A patchwork quilt covered her, and someone had changed her dusty traveling dress for a simple cotton nightgown. A lamp burned low on a nearby table, casting gentle shadows across the walls. The door opened quietly, and a woman entered, middle-aged with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Ah, you're awake," she said softly. "How are you feeling, dear?" Lillian took an experimental breath. To her surprise, the tightness in her chest had eased significantly. "Better," she replied, her voice raspy. "Where am I?" "Crowley Ranch. I'm Martha Crowley." The woman approached the bed, placing a cool hand on Lillian's forehead. "That's good, your fever's broken." "You gave us quite a scare, Miss Astor." "How long have I been here?" "Almost 2 days. The attack was severe, if Garrett hadn't gotten you here when he did." Martha trailed off, busying herself with pouring a glass of water from a pitcher. "Here, drink this. Doc Morgan left some medicine for you." "It's not the same as yours," he said, "but it should help until we can get more of your usual tonic." Lillian accepted the water and the small vial of medicine gratefully. "The others, Mr. and Mrs. Pearson, are they all right?" Martha smiled. "They're fine. Tired and shaken up, but they arrived safely the same night you did. They've been asking about you." Relief washed over Lillian. At least she hadn't abandoned them to a worse fate. "And, Mr. James." She tried to keep her voice casual, but something in Martha's knowing smile suggested she hadn't succeeded. "Garrett's been checking on you regularly. He's out with the men right now. Sheriff Taylor arrived from Sweetwater Creek this morning, and they're putting together a posse to go after those bandits." Lillian's heart sank. The idea of Garrett facing those dangerous men made her stomach knot with worry, which surprised her. She barely knew the man, yet the thought of him in danger affected her deeply. "Don't you fret about him," Martha said, seeming to read Lillian's thoughts. "Garrett James can handle himself. He was a cavalry scout during the war, you know. Youngest in his unit, they say, but the most skilled tracker." Before Lillian could respond, Hoofbeats sounded outside, followed by men's voices. Martha moved to the window. "Speaking of the devil, that's him now with the sheriff." A few minutes later, after Martha had helped Lillian into a borrowed dress and arranged her hair into some semblance of order, a knock came at the bedroom door. "Miss Astor, it's Garrett James. May I come in?" Lillian smoothed her skirts nervously. "Yes, please enter." The door opened, and Garrett stepped inside, removing his hat as he did so. In the daylight, Lillian could fully appreciate his appearance, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-browned skin and eyes the color of weathered sage. A scar ran along his jawline, speaking of past dangers, but his smile was warm and genuine. "It's good to see you awake," he said, his deep voice sending an inexplicable flutter through Lillian's chest. "How are you feeling?" "Much improved, thanks to you," Lillian replied. "Mrs. Crowley tells me you saved my life." Garrett shifted uncomfortably, clearly unused to praise. "Anyone would have done the same." "Nevertheless, I am eternally grateful." She met his gaze steadily. "Mrs. Crowley mentioned you're forming a posse to go after the bandits." He nodded, his expression turning serious. "Sheriff Taylor's organizing it. We ride out at dawn tomorrow. Those men need to be brought to justice." "And my medicine. Do you think, if they still have it, we'll recover it?" Garrett promised. "Along with everything else they stole. But don't worry about that for now. Doc Morgan says his medicine should help until then." Lillian nodded, though worry still creased her brow. "Please be careful, Mr. James. Those men were ruthless." Something flickered in Garrett's eyes, surprise, perhaps, at her concern for him. "I've faced worse, Miss Astor." His voice softened. "And please call me Garrett, then you must call me Lillian." A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken thoughts. "I should let you rest," Garrett finally said, backing toward the door. "But I wanted to tell you, once you're fully recovered, I'd be happy to escort you to Sweetwater Creek myself." "I understand that's where you were headed," Lillian nodded. "Yes, I've accepted a position as the school teacher there." Garrett's face brightened. "Well then, we'll be neighbors of sorts. My ranch is just outside town." The thought brought a warmth to Lillian's cheeks. "I'd appreciate the escort, thank you." After Garrett left, Lillian sank back against her pillows, her mind whirling with thoughts of bandits and posses and a pair of sage-green eyes that seemed to see right through her carefully constructed composure. The next morning, Lillian insisted on getting up despite Martha's protests. She wanted to bid farewell to Garrett and the posse before they departed. Wrapped in a borrowed shawl against the early morning chill, she stood on the ranch house porch as the men made their final preparations. Sheriff Taylor, a grizzled man with a no-nonsense demeanor, was giving instructions to the assembled riders, 8 in total, including Garrett. They were loading provisions, checking weapons, and tightening saddle girths. Garrett spotted her and broke away from the group, leading his horse over to where she stood. "You should be resting," he admonished gently. "I couldn't let you leave without saying goodbye," Lillian replied. "And good luck." Garrett's expression softened. "We'll be back in a few days, hopefully with your belongings and those outlaws in custody." Impulsively, Lillian reached into her pocket and withdrew her father's pocket watch, the one thing she'd managed to keep from the bandits. "Take this with you." Garrett looked surprised. "I couldn't for luck," Lillian insisted, pressing it into his palm. "It was my father's. It's very precious to me, so you must bring it back safely, and yourself along with it." His fingers closed around the watch, his hand warm against hers. "I give you my word." Sheriff Taylor called out, signaling it was time to depart. With a final nod, Garrett mounted his horse and joined the others. Lillian watched until the riders disappeared over the horizon, a strange emptiness settling in her chest that had nothing to do with her asthma. The days that followed passed slowly for Lillian. She regained her strength gradually, spending time with the Pearsons, who had decided to remain at Crowley Ranch until the posse returned. Mr. Crowley insisted they were welcome guests, especially after learning that Mr. Pearson had once been a respected judge in St. Louis before retiring. Martha Crowley proved to be a kind hostess and a fountain of information about Sweetwater Creek and its inhabitants. Lillian learned that Garrett had inherited his ranch from his uncle 5 years ago, after serving as a cavalry scout during the latter years of the Civil War. He was well respected in the community, known for his fair dealings and willingness to help neighbors in need. "Never took to marriage, though," Martha commented as she and Lillian prepared vegetables for dinner on the third day. "Not for lack of interested young ladies, mind you. He's quite the catch with that ranch of his, but he keeps to himself mostly, except when help's needed." Lillian tried to appear only politely interested in this information, though her heart beat a little faster. "Perhaps he simply hasn't found the right person," she suggested, focusing intently on peeling a potato. Martha gave her a knowing look but said nothing more on the subject. On the morning of the 5th day, Lillian was helping Martha hang laundry when the sound of approaching riders reached them. They hurried to the front of the house, where Mr. Crowley and the Pearsons were already gathering. The posse emerged from a stand of trees, riding at a steady pace. Lillian counted the men anxiously, relief washing over her when she spotted Garrett among them. They appeared weary but unharmed, and behind them, 3 men rode with their hands bound, heads bowed in defeat. Sheriff Taylor approached the house while the others remained mounted. "We got him, Tom," he announced to Mr. Crowley. 3 out of the 4, anyway. Their leader fellow named Dexter Hayes took a bullet during the standoff and didn't make it. Lillian felt a strange mixture of relief and regret at this news. Justice had been served, but a man had died in the process. "And the stolen property?" Mr. Crowley asked. "Recovered most of it," the sheriff replied. "They'd already spent some of the money and sold a few items in a mining camp, but we got back what we could." Garrett dismounted and approached Lillian, a canvas bag in his hands. "Your valise, Miss Astor," he said formally, aware of the eyes upon them. "I believe your medicine is still inside." With trembling hands, Lillian accepted the bag, quickly opening it to find her medicine bottles intact. "Thank you," she whispered, fighting back tears of relief. Garrett reached into his pocket and pulled out her father's pocket watch. "As promised," he said softly, "returned safely." Their fingers brushed as she took the watch, and Lillian felt a current of awareness pass between them. Their eyes met, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fade away: the watching people, the tired horses, even the bound outlaws waiting to be taken to jail. There was only Garrett, his face dust-streaked and weary, but his eyes warm with something that made Lillian's heart skip a beat. The moment was broken by Sheriff Taylor calling Garrett's name. "We need to get these prisoners to Sweetwater Creek before dark." Garrett stepped back, his professional demeanor returning. "You should be well enough to travel tomorrow," he told Lillian. "If you still want me to escort you to Sweetwater Creek." "Yes, I would appreciate that very much." He nodded, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "I'll return for you tomorrow morning then." As Garrett rejoined the posse and they rode away with their prisoners, Lillian clutched her recovered possessions to her chest, already counting the hours until morning. True to his word, Garrett returned the next day with a wagon for Lillian and the Pearsons, who had decided to continue their journey to Virginia City. After tearful goodbyes to the Crowleys, they set out for Sweetwater Creek, a journey that would take most of the day. The Pearsons sat in the back of the wagon among the luggage, while Lillian sat beside Garrett on the driver's seat. The day was perfect for traveling: warm sunshine, tempered by a cool breeze. The vast Montana landscape spread out before them in all its rugged beauty. As they traveled, Lillian found herself opening up to Garrett in a way she hadn't with anyone since her father's death. She told him about growing up in Boston, her father's position as a professor of literature, and how his death from pneumonia had left her alone in the world. "Teaching was the only skill I had," she explained, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. "When I saw the advertisement for a school teacher in Sweetwater Creek, it seemed like fate, perhaps, a chance to begin again somewhere new." Garrett listened attentively, occasionally asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than mere politeness. In turn, he shared stories of his own life, his childhood in Missouri, his time as a cavalry scout, and how he'd come to Montana Territory seeking a fresh start after the war. "It wasn't easy at first," he admitted. "My uncle left me the ranch, but it was struggling. Took 3 years of hard work to make it profitable." He glanced at her with a half smile. "Still, there's something about this land that gets under your skin. Makes you want to put down roots, build something lasting." "I hope I feel that way about Sweetwater Creek," Lillian said softly. They arrived in the town late in the afternoon. Sweetwater Creek was larger than Lillian had expected, not just a remote outpost, but a growing community with a main street lined with businesses, a church with a white steeple, and neat houses spreading outward from the town center. The Pearsons bid them farewell at the Stagecoach station, where they would wait for the next coach to Virginia City. Garrett then drove Lillian to the schoolhouse on the edge of town, a simple one-room building with an adjoining cabin that would serve as her residence. "It's not much," Garrett said as he helped her down from the wagon, "but the town takes pride in education. They fixed up the place special for your arrival." Indeed, the cabin, though small, was clean and welcoming, with curtains at the windows and a vase of wildflowers on the table, clearly the work of thoughtful townspeople anticipating her arrival. "It's perfect," Lillian breathed, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. Garrett brought in her luggage, building a fire in the small stove to ward off the evening chill, before saying he should get back to his ranch before dark. At the door, he hesitated. "The general store will be closed by now, but I've got some supplies in the wagon I can spare until you can shop tomorrow. And there's a welcome dinner at the church tomorrow evening. The whole town will be there to meet you." "Will you come?" Lillian asked, surprising herself with her boldness. A slow smile spread across Garrett's face. "I wouldn't miss it." After he left, Lillian stood in the doorway of her new home, watching his wagon disappear down the road. For the first time since her father's death, she felt a spark of something like hope for the future, and it had little to do with the teaching position and everything to do with a certain rancher with sage green eyes. The welcome dinner at the church the next evening was a lively affair. It seemed the entire population of Sweetwater Creek had turned out to meet their new schoolteacher. Lillian was introduced to so many people she doubted she would remember half their names, but she was touched by their genuine warmth and enthusiasm. Mayor Wilson, a portly man with an impressive mustache, gave a speech welcoming her to the community. Mrs. Wilson, who headed the school board, presented Lillian with a new bell for the schoolhouse and a ledger containing the names of her future pupils, 28 children ranging in age from 6 to 16. Throughout the evening, Lillian found her gaze repeatedly drawn to Garrett, who stood talking with a group of men near the punch bowl. He'd cleaned up for the occasion, wearing a crisp white shirt and black vest that emphasized his broad shoulders. Several times she caught him looking back at her, and each time a flush of warmth crept up her neck. As the evening progressed, Mrs. Wilson took it upon herself to introduce Lillian to every eligible bachelor in town, From the young doctor fresh from medical school in Philadelphia to the widowed owner of the general store. Lillian was polite to each of them, but her thoughts remained with the one man Mrs. Wilson pointedly didn't introduce her to. Finally, as people began to depart, Garrett approached her. "May I walk you home, Mrs. Astor?" he asked formally, though his eyes held a warmth that belied his formal tone. "I'd like that, Mr. James," she replied, equally formal but with a small smile that was just for him. The night was clear, the stars brilliant overhead as they walked the short distance to Lillian's cabin. They spoke little, but the silence between them was comfortable rather than awkward. At her door, Garrett cleared his throat. "School starts Monday, right?" Lillian nodded. "Yes, just 3 days from now. I'll be busy preparing until then. Would you? That is, if you're not too busy." He seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. "I thought you might like to see more of the area before you're confined to the schoolhouse. I could show you around my ranch on Sunday afternoon, if you'd care to come." Joy bubbled up inside Lillian, but she kept her expression composed. "That sounds lovely. Thank you for the invitation." Garrett's answering smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I'll pick you up after church, then." He hesitated, as if wanting to say more, but instead tipped his hat and bid her good night. Lillian watched him walk away, her heart lighter than it had been in months. Sunday couldn't come fast enough for Lillian. She spent Saturday organizing her classroom and preparing lessons, but her thoughts continually drifted to her upcoming visit to Garrett's ranch. By the time Sunday morning arrived, she was a bundle of nerves and excitement. Church service provided her first real opportunity to observe the community as a whole. Families filed into the white clapboard building, dressed in their Sunday best, greeting each other with the easy familiarity of people who had shared joys and hardships. Lillian, seated near the front as the town's new schoolteacher, felt both honored by the position and acutely aware of curious glances directed her way. Garrett arrived just as the service was beginning, slipping into a pew near the back. Throughout the reverend's sermon, Lillian found her attention wandering to the tall figure at the rear of the church, only to quickly redirect her gaze when she caught herself. After the service, several parents approached her to introduce their children, who regarded their new teacher with expressions ranging from shy curiosity to outright suspicion. Lillian did her best to put them at ease, promising an exciting first day of school tomorrow. When the crowd finally thinned, Garrett appeared at her side with his wagon. "Ready for that tour, Mrs. Astor?" he asked, offering his hand to help her up. The Double J Ranch was located 3 miles outside town, set in a verdant valley with a creek running through it and mountains rising in the distance. As they approached, Lillian could see a substantial main house built of logs and stone, several outbuildings, corrals, and pastures where cattle grazed peacefully. "It's beautiful," she breathed as Garrett helped her down from the wagon. Pride colored his voice as he said, "It's not the biggest spread in the territory, but it's good land. My uncle chose well." Garrett showed her around the property, from the barn where a new foal wobbled on spindly legs beside its mother to the vegetable garden that supplied the kitchen with fresh produce. The ranch hands they encountered greeted Garrett with obvious respect and Lillian with polite curiosity. "This is Frank," Garrett introduced an older man with leathery skin and a shock of white hair. "He's my foreman and has forgotten more about ranching than I'll ever know." Frank chuckled, shaking Lillian's hand with surprising gentleness. "Don't let him fool you, Mrs. Astor. The boss learned quick. Best rancher in the territory now, if you ask me." Lillian smiled at the obvious affection between the two men. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Frank." "Just Frank, madam, and the pleasure's all mine. We've heard a lot about the new school teacher." He shot Garrett a sly glance. "Some of us more than others." Garrett cleared his throat, the tips of his ears reddening. "Don't you have horses to tend to, Frank?" The foreman winked at Lillian before ambling off toward the stables. The main house was surprisingly comfortable inside, with sturdy furniture, bookshelves filled with volumes that spoke of Garrett's varied interests, and windows that captured the spectacular view. "My housekeeper's gone to visit her sister today," Garrett explained as he led Lillian to the kitchen. "But she left us a picnic basket. I thought we might eat by the creek if you'd like." The afternoon passed in a golden haze of contentment as they shared the meal in a grassy spot beside the creek. Lillian found herself laughing more than she had in years at Garrett's stories of ranch mishaps and frontier adventures. In turn, she told him about her students in Boston and her hopes for the school in Sweetwater Creek. "You've had quite a journey to get here," Garrett observed as they walked back toward the house, the sun beginning its descent toward the mountains. Stagecoach robbery, stranded in the wilderness, asthma attack. Most women would have taken the next stage back east. Lillian considered this. "Perhaps, but then I wouldn't be here now." She looked up at him, suddenly bold. "And I find I'm very glad to be here." Something flickered in Garrett's eyes, a flash of heat quickly banked. "I'm glad you're here too, Lillian," he said softly. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then Garrett glanced at the setting sun and reluctantly suggested they start back to town. "You've got an important day tomorrow, school teacher." The ride back to Lillian's cabin was quieter, both lost in their own thoughts. At her door, Garrett handed her down from the wagon with careful hands that lingered perhaps a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for today," Lillian said, reluctant to say goodbye. "I had a wonderful time. The pleasure was mine." Garrett hesitated, then added, "Perhaps if you're not too busy with school this week, you might join me for dinner on Friday evening. The hotel restaurant serves a decent meal." Lillian felt a rush of happiness. "I'd like that very much." His answering smile was worth all the hardships of her journey west. "Until Friday, then." As Garrett drove away, Lillian hugged herself with quiet joy. Tomorrow she would begin her new position as Sweetwater Creek schoolteacher. But it was Friday evening that filled her thoughts as she prepared for bed. The first day of school was everything Lillian had hoped for and feared. 28 children of varying ages and abilities filled the one-room schoolhouse, some eager to learn, others clearly there under protest. By day's end, she had a throbbing headache and ink stains on her fingers, but also a profound sense of satisfaction. As the week progressed, Lillian settled into a routine. She rose early each morning to prepare the schoolhouse, taught from 8 until 3, and spent her evenings grading assignments and planning lessons. The work was demanding but fulfilling, and she found herself growing fond of her pupils, even the troublemakers who tested her patience. Word of the Stagecoach robbery had spread throughout the town, and Lillian often found herself asked to recount the tale. She downplayed her own role, but emphasized Garrett's heroism in riding back to find her. This invariably led to knowing looks from the townswomen, particularly Mrs. Wilson, who had taken Lillian under her wing. "A fine man, Garrett James," Mrs. Wilson commented on Thursday as she helped Lillian organize books for the school library. "Not the most sociable fellow, mind you, but honest as the day is long, and that ranch of his is prospering." "He does seem very dedicated to his work," Lillian replied noncommittally. Mrs. Wilson's eyes twinkled. "Indeed, and dedicated to other pursuits when they interest him enough. I've never seen him attend a town social so promptly as he did your welcome dinner, nor invite a lady to his ranch so quickly after her arrival." Lillian felt her cheeks warm. "We shared an unusual experience. It's only natural we'd become friends, of course." Mrs. Wilson smiled knowingly. Well, my dear, you should know that several young ladies have set their caps for Mr. James over the years with no success. Yet here he is, escorting our new schoolteacher about town barely a week after meeting her. People are talking. Lillian's stomach knotted with anxiety. I wouldn't want to damage my reputation or his. Perhaps I should decline his dinner invitation tomorrow. Nonsense. Mrs. Wilson looked horrified at the suggestion. Child, this is 1876, not 1776. A respectable dinner at the hotel is perfectly proper, especially for the schoolteacher and one of our most respected ranchers. She patted Lillian's hand. Besides, it does my heart good to see Garrett James finally taking an interest in something besides cattle. By Friday evening, Lillian's nervousness had transformed into anticipation. She dressed with special care in her best dress, a deep blue merino wool that brought out the color of her eyes, and arranged her chestnut hair in a style more elaborate than her usual schoolteacher bun. Garrett arrived precisely at 7, looking handsome in a dark suit that Lillian suspected he didn't wear often, given his slight awkwardness as he adjusted the collar. His eyes widened appreciatively at the sight of her. "You look beautiful," he said simply. The hotel restaurant was Sweetwater Creek's finest establishment, with white tablecloths and a menu that offered more than just the usual frontier fare. Garrett was clearly known here, as the proprietor greeted him warmly and showed them to a table near the window. Over dinner, they talked easily about their week Lillian's challenges with her new pupils, Garrett's preparations for selling some of his stock in the upcoming weeks. There was a comfortable familiarity between them now, but also an underlying current of awareness that made each glance, each accidental touch of hands, charged with meaning. "I've been thinking about your experience with the Stagecoach robbery," Garrett said as they lingered over coffee. "It occurs to me that you might feel safer having protection, especially living alone at the edge of town." Lillian tilted her head questioningly. "I have a new litter of pups at the ranch," he explained. "Border collies smart as whips and loyal to a fault. One of them, a female, seems especially intelligent. She'd make a good companion and watchdog if you'd like her." Touched by his thoughtfulness, Lillian smiled. "I've never had a dog before, but I'd love to meet her. I'll bring her by tomorrow if that suits you." As they left the restaurant, several townspeople nodded greetings, their curious glances following the couple onto the street. Garrett seemed oblivious to the attention, but Lillian was acutely aware of it. "Does it bother you?" she asked as they walked toward her cabin. "The talk, Mrs. Wilson mentioned that people have noticed our friendship." Garrett's expression turned serious. "People will always talk, Lillian. It's the nature of small towns. The question is whether it bothers you." She considered this carefully. "I'm not accustomed to being the subject of gossip. In Boston, my life was very private, but I find I don't mind as much as I thought I would." She glanced up at him. "Does that sound terribly improper?" His laugh was warm in the cool evening air. "Not improper, honest." At her door, Garrett took her hand, his thumb brushing lightly over her knuckles. "Thank you for dining with me tonight. I'd like to do it again if you're willing." Lillian's heart quickened at his touch. "I'd like that very much." For a moment she thought he might kiss her, but instead he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her fingers. "Good night, Lillian." "Good night, Garrett." She watched him walk away, a curious mixture of disappointment and anticipation swirling inside her. Their relationship was evolving, carefully and properly, but with a definite direction that both thrilled and frightened her. True to his word, Garrett arrived the next afternoon with a black and white border collie puppy cradled in his arms. The dog, about 3 months old, regarded Lillian with bright, intelligent eyes. "What's her name?" Lillian asked, cautiously reaching out to stroke the soft fur. She doesn't have one yet. I thought you might want to choose. The puppy sniffed Lillian's hand, then licked it enthusiastically. Laughing, Lillian took the dog into her arms, where it immediately tried to lick her face. I think I'll call her Sage. Garrett's eyes softened. For the sagebrush, among other things, Lillian replied with a small smile, thinking of his eyes the exact color of sage leaves. Garrett spent the afternoon showing Lillian how to care for Sage, explaining the dog's needs and beginning her training with basic commands. The puppy was indeed intelligent, quickly picking up on sit and stay with minimal repetition. She'll be a quick study, Garrett said approvingly. Much like her new mistress. As the weeks passed, Lillian fell into a pleasant routine. Weekdays were devoted to her students, while weekends often included outings with Garrett, rides across his ranch land, picnics by the creek, or dinners in town. Sage grew rapidly, proving to be both an affectionate companion and a vigilant protector. Lillian found herself increasingly accepted by the community. Parents invited her to Sunday dinners, students brought her wildflowers and apples, and the ladies of the town included her in their quilting circles and social events. Even Mrs. Wilson's initial matchmaking, zeal had mellowed into quiet approval of Lillian's developing relationship with Garrett. For his part, Garrett was a model of propriety in public, careful never to compromise Lillian's standing as the town's schoolteacher. But in private moments, a lingering touch when helping her into his wagon, the warmth in his eyes when she spoke passionately about her teaching, the way he sometimes stood close enough that she could feel the heat of his body. Lillian sensed the depth of his feelings. October brought crisp days and cool nights, the surrounding hills ablaze with autumn colors. On a particularly beautiful Saturday, Garrett suggested a ride to a special place he wanted to show her. They rode out from his ranch on horseback, Lillian having become a passable rider under Garrett's patient instruction. Sage bounded alongside them, occasionally darting off to investigate interesting scents, but always returning at Lillian's whistle. After an hour's ride, they crested a hill to find a breathtaking view, a small, pristine lake surrounded by golden aspens, with mountains rising majestically in the background. "It's magnificent," Lillian breathed as they dismounted. "My uncle brought me here when I first arrived," Garrett said, leading her to a flat rock overlooking the water. He said this spot always reminded him why he chose Montana over anywhere else on Earth. They spread a blanket on the rock and shared the picnic lunch Garrett had packed. As they ate, Garrett spoke of his plans for the ranch, expanding his herd, building a new barn, perhaps adding an orchard next spring. "You've built something wonderful here," Lillian said, watching the sunlight dance across the lake's surface. "You should be proud." "I am," Garrett agreed. "But lately I've been thinking there's something missing." He turned to face her directly. "When I first came here, all I wanted was to make the ranch successful. Now that it is, I find myself wanting more." Lillian's heart began to race. "What more do you want?" "A future that includes more than just cattle and land." He took her hand gently. "A future that includes you, Lillian, if you'll have me." She stared at him, momentarily speechless with emotion. "I know it hasn't been long," Garrett continued, his usually confident voice tinged with uncertainty. "And I'm not the most polished man. I don't have fancy words or city manners, but I care for you more than I've ever cared for anyone. When I found you that night, half conscious and struggling to breathe, something changed in me. I knew I wanted to protect you, to be there for you. And these past weeks have only deepened those feelings." Tears welled in Lillian's eyes. "Garrett, I'm not asking for an answer today," he said quickly. "Just think about it. Think about whether you could see yourself building a life here with me." Overwhelmed by emotion, Lillian could only nod. Garrett squeezed her hand gently, then released it, giving her the space to collect her thoughts. They stayed by the lake until late afternoon, talking of lighter matters but with a new awareness between them. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. At the ranch house, Garrett helped Lillian down from her horse. "I'll drive you back to town," he said, but Lillian placed a hand on his arm. "Before we go, I have something to say." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I don't need time to think about it, Garrett. I've known for weeks now that my feelings for you run deeper than friendship." Hope blazed in his eyes. "Are you saying I'm saying yes?" Lillian interrupted with a smile. "Yes, I can see a future with you. Yes, I want to build a life here. Yes to everything you're offering." With a sound that was half laugh, half groan, Garrett pulled her into his arms. "Lillian," he breathed, and then his mouth found hers in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened into something that left them both breathless. When they finally parted, Lillian's cheeks were flushed and her heart was racing. "That was overdue," Garrett finished with a grin that made him look boyish despite the day's growth of stubble shadowing his jaw. Then his expression turned serious. "I love you, Lillian Astor. I think I've loved you since that night under the Montana stars when you trusted me with your life." Tears of happiness spilled down Lillian's cheeks. "And I love you, Garrett James. My rescuer, my friend, my future." He kissed her again, more gently this time, sealing their declarations with a tenderness that spoke volumes about the man he was. Later, as they drove back to town in the gathering dusk, they spoke of practical matters: when they might marry, whether Lillian would continue teaching afterward, how they would announce their engagement to the town. "Mrs. Wilson will be insufferably pleased with herself," Lillian laughed. "She's been hinting about wedding bells since the first time she saw us together." "Smart woman, Mrs. Wilson," Garrett replied with a grin. "Though I'd appreciate it if you didn't tell her I said so. I'll never hear the end of it." At Lillian's cabin, Garrett helped her and Sage down from the wagon, then hesitated. "I should speak to Reverend Thomas tomorrow about publishing the banns," he said. "Unless you think it's too soon." Lillian shook her head. "Not too soon. Though perhaps we might wait until spring for the actual wedding. I'd like flowers, and for my students to be able to attend without trudging through snow." "Spring it is," Garrett agreed, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. "I'd wait a lifetime for you, Lillian, though I admit spring already seems too far away." With a final kiss goodnight, Garrett departed, leaving Lillian standing in her doorway with Sage at her feet, watching his wagon until it disappeared from sight. The news of their engagement spread through Sweetwater Creek like wildfire. By Monday morning, Lillian's students were full of questions about whether she would continue teaching after she became Mrs. James, and whether they would be invited to the wedding. Most of the town seemed genuinely pleased by the match. Garrett was well respected, and Lillian had quickly become a valued member of the community. There were a few disappointed young men and women who had harbored hopes for themselves, but even they could not deny the obvious affection between the couple. The autumn days grew shorter, the nights colder. Garrett was busy with ranch work, preparing his cattle and property for the coming winter, while Lillian threw herself into teaching and planning an end-of-term Christmas pageant for her students. Despite their busy schedules, they made time to see each other several times a week, their bond growing stronger with each meeting. In November, a letter arrived from Boston, Lillian's aunt, responding to the news of her engagement. The response was lukewarm at best, questioning how Lillian could possibly be sure of her feelings after such a short acquaintance, and expressing doubt about life on a frontier outpost. "She doesn't understand," Lillian told Garrett as they sat before the fire in his ranch house, the letter crumpled in her lap. "She thinks I've lost my mind. Abandoning civilization for a rancher I've known barely 3 months. Garrett's expression was troubled. Do her concerns worry you? No, Lillian replied without hesitation. Aunt Margaret has always been conventional. She can't imagine that real happiness might be found outside drawing rooms and theater boxes. She looked up at him, her blue eyes clear and certain. I've never been more sure of anything in my life than I am of us, Garrett. Relief washed over his face. He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. Still, I hate to be the cause of a rift between you and your family. Your aunt is welcome to visit, to see for herself that you'll want for nothing here. Lillian chuckled at the thought of her prim aunt on the ranch. That's a kind offer, but I doubt she'll accept. Aunt Margaret considers crossing the Charles River into Cambridge an adventure. As December arrived with its first heavy snow, Lillian and Garrett's plans for a spring wedding proceeded apace. They decided on April, when the worst of winter would be past, but before the busy summer season began for the ranch. Mrs. Wilson and several other town ladies had enthusiastically taken on much of the planning, leaving Lillian free to focus on her teaching duties. One evening in mid-December, Lillian was putting final touches on costumes for the Christmas pageant when an urgent knocking came at her door. Opening it, she found Frank, Garrett's foreman, his face grave beneath the brim of his snow-dusted hat. "Miss Astor, you need to come to the ranch right away. It's the boss. He's been hurt." Fear clutched at Lillian's heart. What happened? How badly? Bull got him. Gored his leg and tossed him against the corral fence. Doc's with him now, but he's asking for you. Lillian threw on her warmest cloak and grabbed her medical bag, which contained her asthma medicine and other remedies. "Let me get Sage inside, and I'll be ready." The ride to the ranch was the longest of Lillian's life, despite Frank pushing the horses as fast as was safe on the snowy roads. He explained that Garrett had been helping separate a new bull from the herd when the animal suddenly charged, catching him before he could reach safety. Is it very bad?" Lillian asked, dreading the answer. Frank's weathered face was grim in the moonlight. "Bad enough. Lost a lot of blood before we could get him to the house. Doc's worried about infection setting in." At the ranch, Lillian rushed inside to find Dr. Morgan emerging from Garrett's bedroom, wiping his hands on a towel. "Ah, Mrs. Astor. He's been asking for you," the doctor said, his expression serious. "I've done what I can for now. The wound is deep, missed the major artery, thank God, or he'd have bled out before you got here, but there's muscle damage. And as I told Frank, I'm concerned about infection." "Can I see him?" Dr. Morgan nodded. "Keep it brief. He needs rest more than anything else right now. I've given him laudanum for the pain, so he may be a bit unfocused." Lillian found Garrett pale and sweating in his bed, his right leg elevated on pillows and heavily bandaged. His eyes were closed, but they fluttered open at the sound of her approach. "Lillian," he murmured, reaching for her hand. "You came." "Of course I came." She sat gently on the edge of the bed, taking his hand in both of hers. His skin was hot to the touch, fever already setting in. "How are you feeling?" A weak smile touched his lips. "Been better. That bull had a grudge." "You need to rest," Lillian said, stroking his damp hair back from his forehead. "Doctor's orders. Had to see you first." His grip on her hand tightened. "Needed to tell you, love you." Tears pricked at Lillian's eyes. "I love you too. Now sleep so you can get better." He nodded, his eyes already drifting closed again under the influence of the laudanum. Within moments, his breathing had deepened, though it remained slightly labored. Dr. Morgan was waiting in the hallway when Lillian emerged from the bedroom, her face pale with worry. "Will he recover fully?" she asked without preamble. The doctor sighed. "It's too early to say for certain. If we can prevent infection, his chances are good. The next few days will be critical." He studied her face. I understand you've had nursing experience with your father's illness, Lillian nodded. Yes, I cared for him during his final months. Good. I can't stay. There's a difficult birth in town I need to attend to, but I'll be back in the morning. In the meantime, keep the wound clean, change the dressings as I've shown the housekeeper, and try to get fluids into him when he's awake. If his fever rises significantly, use cold compresses. He handed her a bottle. More laudanum for the pain. Use it sparingly, just enough to keep him comfortable. After the doctor left, Lillian spoke briefly with Mrs. Larson, the housekeeper, establishing a schedule for watching over Garrett through the night. Then she sent a note to Mrs. Wilson explaining her absence from school the next day, knowing the older woman would arrange for a substitute teacher. The night passed in anxious vigilance. Garrett's fever rose steadily, and by dawn, he was delirious, muttering about cavalry charges and stagecoach bandits. Lillian bathed his face and chest with cool water, speaking soothingly even when she wasn't sure he could hear her. Dr. Morgan returned mid-morning, his face grave as he examined the wound. The infection is taking hold, he told Lillian. We need to clean the wound more aggressively. What followed was an ordeal Lillian would never forget. Despite the laudanum, Garrett cried out in pain as the doctor reopened the wound to clean it thoroughly, packing it with a poultice of herbs known for their infection-fighting properties before rebandaging it. Now we wait, Dr. Morgan said, washing his hands in a basin. Continue with the cold compresses for the fever. I'll return this evening. Days blurred together as Lillian, Mrs. Larson, and Frank took turns sitting with Garrett. His fever rose and fell but never broke completely. The wound continued to seep, requiring frequent dressing changes. Lillian read to him during his brief periods of lucidity, holding his hand and offering encouragement. You're going to be fine, she told him, trying to infuse her voice with a confidence she didn't entirely feel. We'll still have our April wedding. You'll be dancing by then. Garrett managed a weak smile. Counting on it, he whispered before drifting off again. A week passed with little improvement. Dr. Morgan spoke of the possibility of amputation if the infection didn't abate, a prospect that filled Lillian with dread. She knew how much Garrett's independence meant to him, how central his physical capability was to his identity as a rancher. On the 8th night, during Lillian's watch, Garrett's fever spiked dangerously high. He thrashed in the bed, calling out in delirium, his skin burning to the touch despite the cold compresses Lillian continually applied. Don't leave me, Garrett, she whispered, pressing her forehead against his hand. Please fight. I can't lose you too. Exhausted from days of worry and nights of interrupted sleep, Lillian found herself dozing in the chair beside his bed. She dreamed of the night he had found her on the plains, of the safety she had felt in his arms as they rode through the darkness. She woke with a start to find gray dawn light filtering through the curtains. Garrett lay still, too still. Fear clutched at her heart as she leaned forward to check his breathing. To her astonishment, his skin felt cooler beneath her hand. Placing her palm on his forehead, she realized the fever had broken during the night. His breathing was deep and regular, his face relaxed in natural sleep rather than fever-induced unconsciousness. When Dr. Morgan arrived for his morning visit, he confirmed what Lillian had hardly dared to hope. The crisis has passed, he said after examining the wound, which looked less angry than it had the day before. He's not out of danger entirely, but if he continues to improve at this rate, I believe he'll make a full recovery. Tears of relief spilled down Lillian's cheeks. Thank God, she whispered. Throughout that day, Garrett slept peacefully, waking only briefly to take sips of broth and water. By evening, he was more alert, his eyes clear for the first time in days as they focused on Lillian's face. "You look terrible," he said hoarsely, a shadow of his usual teasing smile tugging at his lips. Lillian laughed through her tears. "How charming of you to notice, and after I've spent a week keeping you alive." His expression sobered. "Have you been here the whole time?" She nodded. "Where else would I be? You should rest," he said, concern evident despite his weakness. "You'll make yourself ill. I'm fine. It's you we need to worry about." Garrett reached for her hand, his grip noticeably stronger than it had been. "I heard you, through the fever. Your voice. It was like an anchor keeping me here when the current tried to pull me away." Fresh tears threatened. "Well, I'm very glad it worked. I wasn't ready to let you go." His recovery was slow but steady. By Christmas, he was able to sit up in bed for short periods and eat solid food again. The wound was healing cleanly, though Dr. Morgan warned it would leave a significant scar and that Garrett would likely walk with a limp until the damaged muscles fully healed. "A small price to pay," Garrett said when the doctor had gone, leaving him and Lillian alone. "I could have lost a lot more." Lillian knew he wasn't referring only to his leg. The close call had changed something between them, deepening their bond in ways words couldn't express. They had faced death together and emerged stronger, more certain of what truly mattered. As the new year dawned, Garrett began the difficult process of rehabilitation. At first, he could only stand with assistance, but his determination drove him to push a little further each day. Lillian divided her time between her teaching duties and the ranch, where she encouraged his efforts without allowing him to overtax himself. By February, Garrett was walking short distances with a cane, his frustration at his slow progress evident in the set of his jaw and the occasional flash of temper. But Lillian's steady presence seemed to calm him, her practical optimism a balm to his wounded pride. "You'll ride again by summer," she promised one evening as they sat before the fire in his living room. "Just as you'll dance at our wedding in April." Garrett sighed, absently rubbing his injured leg. "I've been thinking about that. The wedding, I mean." A flicker of apprehension passed through Lillian. "What about it? Maybe we should postpone it until I'm fully recovered." "Absolutely not." Her voice was firm. "Unless you're having second thoughts about marrying me." "God, no." The vehemence in his voice reassured her. "But you deserve better than a husband who can barely walk down the aisle." Lillian moved to kneel before him, taking his hands in hers. "Garrett James, I fell in love with your heart and your spirit, not your ability to walk without a cane. I want to be your wife in April as we planned, whether you're dancing or limping or carried in on a stretcher." A reluctant smile tugged at his mouth. "A stretcher seems excessive." "Then it's settled." She leaned up to kiss him softly. "April it is." As winter gave way to the first hesitant signs of spring, Garrett's strength continued to return. By mid-March, he was walking with only a slight limp, though he still used the cane for longer distances. He had begun riding again, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence as muscle memory reasserted itself. The wedding preparations continued apace. Lillian's dress, made by the town's seamstress with fabric ordered specially from Helena, hung ready in Mrs. Wilson's spare bedroom, a simple but elegant creation of ivory silk, with delicate lace detailing. The church was reserved, the reception planned for the hotel afterward, and the honeymoon arranged a week at a hot springs resort in the mountains, recommended by the doctor as beneficial for Garrett's healing leg. 2 weeks before the wedding, as Lillian was grading papers at her desk after school, Sage suddenly leapt up from her spot by the stove, growling at the door. Before Lillian could call the dog to heel, a knock sounded. Opening the door, she found a stranger, a well-dressed woman in her 50s, with graying hair arranged fashionably beneath a traveling hat. Behind her stood a porter with several expensive-looking trunks. "Yes, can I help you?" Lillian asked, puzzled. The woman's eyes widened in recognition. "Lillian, is it really you?" Realization dawned. "Aunt Margaret, what on earth are you doing here?" "I've come for your wedding, of course." Her aunt glanced dubiously at the small cabin. "Though I see I should have wired ahead. Is there a hotel in this settlement?" Still stunned, Lillian nodded. "Yes, just down the street. But how did you? I thought you said you couldn't possibly make such a journey." "I changed my mind." Margaret Whitley drew herself up with dignity. "You are the only family I have left, Lillian. I could not allow you to marry without proper family representation, no matter how unconventional your choice might be." The implication that Garrett was somehow unsuitable bristled, but Lillian tamped down her irritation. "That's thoughtful of you, Aunt Margaret. Let me walk you to the hotel and help you get settled." After arranging her aunt's accommodations and promising to call for her the next day to show her around town, Lillian hurried to the ranch to share the surprising development with Garrett. He took the news with characteristic equanimity. "So she's come to inspect the savage frontiersman who's stolen her niece's heart. Fair enough. I'll polish my six-shooter and try not to spit on the floor while she's looking." Lillian swatted his arm. "This isn't funny, Garrett. Aunt Margaret can be difficult and judgmental. And she clearly has reservations about our marriage. Then we'll just have to change her mind." He pulled Lillian into his arms, his eyes warm with affection. "Don't worry so much. If she loves you, she'll come around when she sees how happy you are. And if she doesn't, well, it won't change anything between us." Lillian rested her head against his chest, drawing comfort from his steady heartbeat. "You're right, of course. It's just, she's my only family. I'd like her blessing." The next day, Lillian took her aunt on a tour of Sweetwater Creek. Margaret was politely disdainful of the dusty streets and simple buildings, though she conceded that the schoolhouse was charmingly rustic and the church surprisingly adequate. "And where will you live after the wedding?" she inquired as they walked back toward the hotel. "Not in that tiny cabin, I hope, at the ranch with Garrett," Lillian replied. "We'll be having dinner there tonight so you can see it for yourself." Margaret sniffed. A ranch house. How novel. That evening, Garrett was at his most charming as he welcomed Margaret to his home. He had clearly gone to extra effort. The house was spotless. Fresh flowers adorned the tables, and Mrs. Larson had prepared an impressive dinner that even Margaret had to grudgingly admire. "This is quite civilized," she commented as they sat in the parlor after dinner, making it sound as though she had expected to eat raw meat around a campfire. "You have a comfortable home, Mr. James." "Thank you, Mrs. Whitley. I've been fortunate in my endeavors here." Garrett sat beside Lillian on the sofa, his hand resting lightly on hers. "And I'll be even more fortunate when your niece consents to share it with me." Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly. "Yes, about that. Don't you think this has all been rather precipitous?" "Lillian has only been in this territory for what, 7 months? And you propose to marry after such a brief acquaintance?" "Aunt Margaret," Lillian began, but Garrett squeezed her hand gently. "It's a fair question," he said. "By Boston standards, I imagine our courtship seems rushed. But life moves differently out here, Mrs. Whitley. When you find something or someone of value, you recognize it quickly and hold on tight." He looked at Lillian, his eyes soft with love. "I knew your niece was special the moment I found her that night on the plains. Everything since has only confirmed that first impression." "A romantic notion," Margaret replied dryly. "But marriage requires more than romance, Mr. James. It requires compatibility, shared values, similar backgrounds. You and Lillian come from vastly different worlds." "Perhaps," Garrett acknowledged. "But we share what matters most: respect for each other, common goals for the future, and love deep enough to weather any differences. Lillian felt a surge of pride at his eloquence. For a man who claimed not to have fancy words, Garrett could express himself remarkably well when it mattered. Margaret seemed less impressed. Pretty speeches aside, Mr. James, I worry that Lillian doesn't fully understand what she's giving up. A cultured life in Boston, access to society, the chance to marry a man of her own class. Aunt Margaret, Lillian interrupted, unable to contain herself any longer. That's quite enough. Garrett is the finest man I've ever known, and I'm marrying him because I love him and want to build a life with him, not because there are no other options. I know exactly what I'm choosing, and I couldn't be happier with my decision. A tense silence followed her outburst. Then, to Lillian's surprise, her aunt's expression softened slightly. "You sound very certain," Margaret said, studying her niece's flushed face. "I am certain, more certain than I've ever been about anything." Margaret turned her attention back to Garrett. "And you, Mr. James? Are you equally certain?" Lillian is an educated woman, accustomed to intellectual stimulation and cultural refinements. Will you be able to provide those things for her here, or will she wither like a hothouse flower transplanted to the wilderness? Instead of taking offense, Garrett smiled. "Would you like to see something, Mrs. Whitley?" Without waiting for an answer, he rose and crossed to a door that Lillian had assumed was a closet. Opening it, he revealed a small room lined with bookshelves, hundreds of volumes arranged neatly by subject and author. "My uncle's collection, which I've continued to expand," he explained. "History, literature, science, philosophy. Lillian won't lack for intellectual stimulation, I assure you. As for culture, we may not have Boston Symphony, but Helena has a respectable theater and we attend when we can. And Sweetwater Creek itself has musical evenings, a literary society, and ambitions for a library, which Lillian is helping to establish." Margaret appeared genuinely surprised, both by the library and by Garrett's evident education. "I see I may have underestimated the opportunities here." "Many people do," Garrett said without rancor. "It's a common misconception that we're all uncultured roughnecks on the frontier. Some of us are, certainly, but many came west bringing their love of learning and refinement with them." He returned to his seat beside Lillian. "I want you to know, Mrs. Whitley, that I understand what a treasure your niece is. I will spend my life making sure she never regrets choosing this life with me." For the first time since her arrival, Margaret's expression held something like approval. "Well, you are more eloquent than I expected, Mr. James." "Only when it matters, madam." The evening ended on a cautiously optimistic note, with Margaret agreeing to stay until the wedding and help with any last-minute preparations. As Garrett drove Lillian and her aunt back to town, Margaret surprised them both by saying, "Your ranch is quite impressive, Mr. James. You've clearly worked hard to build something substantial." "Thank you, Mrs. Whitley. That means a great deal coming from you." Later, after Margaret had retired to her hotel room, Garrett walked Lillian to her cabin. "I think we made progress," he said, putting his arm around her shoulders. "I think you charmed her despite herself," Lillian replied, leaning into his embrace. "Thank you for being so patient with her. She loves you. That makes her worthy of patience." He kissed the top of her head. "Besides, I'd face a lot worse than a disapproving aunt to win you." The days leading up to the wedding passed in a whirlwind of final preparations. To Lillian's surprise and delight, her aunt threw herself into helping, offering suggestions based on Boston weddings, but deferring to local customs when appropriate. Margaret still occasionally made comments about frontier limitations, but they lacked the edge of condescension that had marked her earlier remarks. Most surprising was the developing rapport between Margaret and Mrs. Wilson, who discovered a shared passion for propriety and social correctness that transcended their different backgrounds. Together, they became a formidable wedding planning team, freeing Lillian to focus on finishing the school term before her brief honeymoon. The evening before the wedding, after the rehearsal at the church, Margaret asked to speak privately with Lillian. They sat in Margaret's hotel room, a pot of tea between them. "I owe you an apology, Lillian," Margaret began, surprising her niece. "I came here with many preconceptions about your Mr. James and this life you've chosen. I was certain you had made a terrible mistake and needed to be rescued from your own impulsivity. And now," Lillian asked cautiously, "now I see that I was wrong." Margaret's expression was unusually gentle. "Your young man is indeed remarkable, educated, successful, and clearly devoted to you. And this community, while certainly not Boston, has a charm and vitality I didn't expect to find." Relief washed over Lillian. "Thank you, Aunt Margaret. Your approval means a great deal to me. More than that," Margaret continued, reaching into her handbag, "I want to give you this." She handed Lillian a small velvet box. "It was your mother's, I thought. Well, I thought it appropriate that you should have it for tomorrow." Inside the box was an exquisite sapphire and diamond pendant on a delicate silver chain. Lillian gasped, tears springing to her eyes. "Mother's pendant. I remember her wearing this on special occasions. Your father gave it to her on their wedding day. Something blue, he called it." Margaret's voice held a rare note of sentimentality. "I think she would be very proud of you, Lillian. You've shown the same courage and independence she always admired." Lillian closed the box carefully, then embraced her aunt. "Thank you for the pendant and for coming all this way and for trying to understand." Margaret patted her back somewhat awkwardly, unused to such displays of affection. "Yes, well, you are family after all, my responsibility." The morning of April 17th dawned clear and mild, as if nature itself approved of the union about to take place. In Mrs. Wilson's spare bedroom, Lillian dressed with the help of her aunt and the mayor's wife, the ivory silk gown flowing gracefully over her slender figure. Margaret fastened the sapphire pendant around her niece's neck, its blue depths catching the light as Lillian moved. "Perfect," Margaret pronounced, stepping back to survey the effect. "You look absolutely beautiful, my dear." A knock at the door revealed Frank, Garrett's foreman, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday best. "Miss Astor, the boss asked me to give you this before the ceremony." He handed her a small package wrapped in tissue paper. Inside, Lillian found a delicate silver bracelet set with small Montana sapphires that perfectly matched her pendant. A note in Garrett's bold handwriting read simply, "For my bride. All my love, G." Tears threatened to spoil her carefully applied rouge. "Oh, it's beautiful. Excellent taste," Margaret approved as she fastened the bracelet around Lillian's wrist. "Your young man continues to surprise me." At the church, it seemed the entire population of Sweetwater Creek had turned out for the wedding. Lillian's students were there in their Sunday best, the girls clutching small posies of spring flowers. The Crowleys had made the journey from their ranch, as had neighboring ranchers and their families. Even the Pearsons, the elderly couple from the Stagecoach, had sent a telegram of congratulations from Virginia City. Lillian waited in the church vestibule, her arm linked with Mr. Wilson's, who had agreed to give her away in her father's absence. Through the partially open door, she could see Garrett standing at the altar, tall and handsome in his new suit, his cane nowhere in sight. He had worked diligently at his exercises, determined to stand without assistance on this day. The music began, Mrs. Peterson at the small organ, playing a traditional wedding march. The congregation rose as the doors opened fully, all heads turning to watch Lillian's progress down the aisle. But Lillian had eyes only for Garrett, whose expression of wonder and love as he beheld his bride was worth more than all the cultured society Boston could offer. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Thomas began once Lillian stood beside Garrett, their hands joined. "We are gathered here today in the sight of God and this community to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The ceremony was simple but deeply moving. When it came time for their vows, Garrett's voice was clear and strong, his eyes never leaving Lillian's face as he promised to love and cherish her all the days of his life. Lillian's own voice trembled slightly with emotion, but her words were equally sincere. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the Reverend concluded. "You may kiss your bride." Garrett's kiss was gentle but full of promise, a fitting beginning to their life together. As they turned to face the congregation, now officially Mr. and Mrs. Garrett James, the church erupted in applause and cheers. The celebration at the hotel afterward was joyous and lively. There was music and dancing, abundant food, and a magnificent cake baked by Mrs. Larson. True to his word, Garrett danced with his bride, moving carefully but without obvious pain, his face alight with happiness. Margaret, watching from the sidelines with Mrs. Wilson, actually smiled. "They do make a handsome couple," she admitted, "and he clearly adores her." "As she does him, Mrs. Wilson replied. "You've raised a remarkable niece, Mrs. Whitley." "Yes," Margaret agreed thoughtfully. "I believe I have." Later, as Lillian and Garrett prepared to depart for their honeymoon, Margaret approached them. "I've decided to extend my stay for a few weeks," she announced. "If that's acceptable to you both. Mrs. Wilson has kindly invited me to assist with some church functions, and I find I'm not quite ready to return to Boston just yet." Lillian exchanged a surprised glance with Garrett. "Of course, it's acceptable, Aunt Margaret. We'd be delighted to have you stay longer." "Excellent. Then I shall see you when you return from your trip." She kissed Lillian's cheek, and to everyone's surprise, briefly embraced Garrett as well. "Take good care of each other," she said before stepping back to allow other guests to offer their farewells. As they rode away in Garrett's wagon, decorated with ribbons and flowers by Lillian's students, Garrett laughed. "I think your aunt might actually approve of me now." "Miracles do happen," Lillian agreed, leaning against his shoulder. "Though I would have married you even if she hadn't." "I know." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "That's just one of the countless reasons I love you, Mrs. James." The honeymoon at the Hot Springs Resort was everything they had hoped for: peaceful, romantic, and healing for both body and spirit. They returned to Sweetwater Creek refreshed and ready to begin their life together in earnest. Margaret stayed for nearly a month, long enough to see Lillian settled into her role as ranch mistress while continuing to teach until the end of the school term. To everyone's surprise, including her own, Margaret found herself charmed by the frontier lifestyle and the warmth of the community. When she finally departed for Boston, it was with promises to return the following summer and frequent letters in between. Lillian completed the school year, and after much consideration, decided to continue teaching for at least another term. The school board, pleased with her work, agreed to a modified schedule that would allow her to balance her duties as both teacher and rancher's wife. As summer turned to fall and then to winter again, Lillian and Garrett settled into the rhythm of ranch life together. Their home became known for its hospitality, with frequent gatherings that brought together neighbors from miles around. Lillian started a lending library in one room of the house, sharing their books with anyone who wished to borrow them. Garrett's business flourished under their combined efforts, his cattle operation expanding to include breeding horses as well. One evening in early December, as they sat before the fire in their living room with Sage dozing at their feet, Garrett noticed Lillian's thoughtful expression. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. James," she smiled, taking his hand and placing it gently on her still flat stomach. "I was just wondering what kind of father you'll be." It took a moment for her meaning to register. When it did, Garrett's face transformed with wonder and joy. "Are you certain?" Lillian nodded. "Dr. Morgan confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby in late June." With a whoop of delight, Garrett pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and passion that had only grown stronger during their months of marriage. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby. The beginning of our family," Lillian agreed, her heart full to bursting with happiness. Later, as they lay in bed talking of their hopes and plans for their child, Garrett suddenly chuckled. "You know, when I rode back to find you that night after the Stagecoach robbery, I never imagined where it would lead. I just knew I couldn't leave someone stranded out there in the wilderness." "Divine providence," Lillian murmured, nestling closer to him. "Or perhaps just the best kind of luck. Either way, I thank God every day that I found you." He placed a protective hand over her stomach where their child grew. "And that you found me right back." Outside their window, snow began to fall gently over the Montana landscape, a soft blanket of white covering the land they both had come to love. Inside, wrapped in each other's arms, Lillian and Garrett James welcomed the future with open hearts, their love a beacon that would guide them through whatever joys and challenges awaited on the horizon. As the years passed, their family grew. Their firstborn, a son they named Thomas after Lillian's father, arrived right on schedule in June, a healthy, robust boy with his father's green eyes and his mother's determined spirit. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth Margaret, nicknamed Libby, who inherited Lillian's chestnut hair and love of books. The ranch prospered under their careful stewardship. Garrett's innovative breeding programs and Lillian's meticulous record keeping transformed the Double J into one of the most respected operations in the territory. They built a larger home to accommodate their growing family. Though the original ranch house remained special to them, both the place where their journey together had truly begun. Lillian eventually retired from teaching to focus on raising their children and managing the household. But her impact on Sweetwater Creek's education system continued through her work on the school board and her fundraising efforts to build a proper town library, which was completed in 1883 and named in honor of Garrett's book, Loving Uncle. Margaret visited every summer as promised, gradually shedding her city airs as she came to appreciate the richness of frontier life. She doted on her grandniece and grandnephew, bringing them books and cultural treasures from the East, but also learning to ride horses and even help with calving under Garrett's patient instruction. Through all life's changes, the birth of their third child, a son named Daniel in 1884, Garrett's eventual election as mayor of the growing town, Montana's transition from territory to statehood in 1889, one thing remained constant: the deep and abiding love between Lillian and Garrett, forged in an unlikely rescue on the Montana plains and strengthened through every joy and challenge they faced together. On their 25th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their children, friends, and neighbors in the home they had built together, Garrett raised a glass to his wife. "To Lillian," he said, his voice still strong though now threaded with silver like his hair, "who gave me everything worth having in this life." Lillian's eyes, as blue as the day they met, shone with tears of happiness as she returned the toast. "And to Garrett, who rode back for me when others rode away. My rescuer, my love, my home." Their legacy lived on in their children, their ranch, and the community they helped to build, a testament to the power of love to transform lives and create something beautiful and lasting, even from the most challenging beginnings. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the day's work was done, they would sit together on their porch watching the sun set over the Montana mountains, Garrett's arm around Lillian's shoulders, and marvel at the journey that had brought them to this moment of perfect contentment. "I never regretted it, you know," Lillian would say softly. "Not for a single day." And Garrett, holding her close, would reply with the simple truth that had guided them through all their years together. "Neither did I, my love. Neither did I."